So I hope this talk, to a certain extent, has introduced you to the complexity of human love. That's just 4 of the possible answers to the question, what is love? And there are many, many more. I say in my book that my ambition is not to provide you with a formula of love. After all, I think that is absolutely impossible, because there is always a bit of a person's experience of love which is subjective and which we as scientists will never get to touch. And in one sense, I think that's what makes love so fascinating. We do have more tools than ever before in science to unpick what love might be, but there will always be this little element which allows the poets and the creative types and you and I to experience something that is unique. I've just brought up this last slide because I just want to emphasize to you how many different beings and people you get to have love with in your life. Because one of the important parts of my book also was I wanted us to re-engage with the full spectrum of human love. We are the only species, as far as we know, and I think we can pretty much say this, that experiences love in so many different ways. So we get to experience love with our community. We get to experience love with our friends. We get to experience love with our lovers. But even within that spectrum, we can go from polyamory all the way up to the aromantic end of things. So we need to be aware that romantic love itself is a spectrum. We get to experience love within our families, with our children. We get to experience love with our pets. And for all you dog lovers out there, there is a whole section in the book about the fact that dogs do love us and we love them back, but also how important that interspecies love, regardless of what your pet is, to human good health and mental well-being. We love gods. And this, I think, is one of the most amazing aspects of human love. We are able to love something that doesn't manifest in physical form. And the new neuroscience of religious experience, as well as the interviews that have been carried out with those who are devout followers of religion. I spent a lot of time, for example, interviewing nuns, and their words are included in the book. I think that really has helped us understand that the love that these people experience for their God or gods is love, and that they are experiencing love as strong as that with any other human. Also, we may be able to experience love with a celebrity. That's known as parasocial love. Unfortunately, I didn't get to interview Lady Gaga. She wasn't available, but certainly I spoke to some of her fans who are called Little Monsters. And that's looking at parasocial love. And that area of science is only just beginning. You would have called it a teenage crush maybe in your younger years, but actually parasocial love might be an actual phenomenon. And it might actually be using the same mechanism that underpins religious love, which allows us to form love relationships with celebrities, even though we might not ever meet them in person. And finally, looking to the future of love, and this is looking at the possibility of love for robots, for humanoid robots, whether that be friendship love, sexual love, whatever it might be, and also looking at the possibility of love with an avatar in the new metaverse. So we have the potential to experience love in so many different ways, and I think it's really interesting to understand what unites all those different sorts of love, but also what makes them individually so special and important to us as humans. I want to thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. I would really love to hear your questions or experiences, and I will hand back now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. What a lovely and inspiring end at the end there. I do find it absolutely hilarious that the Russians linked love to suffering. That's so Russian. Okay, so we're going to move on to questions. As you said, please, audience, that is your cue. Type them into the Q&A box down below or wherever it is on your screen. Before we do that, though, Anna, I think your book is fantastic. Just a couple of questions for me, if that's okay. You quote someone in your book, James, who says that the realization of lockdown for him was that he now has fewer friends and loved ones that he thought he had. You've learned a lot about love. You're an expert. For anyone in the audience who potentially have found themselves in that situation, do you have any practical tips for how to engage with love, or to sort of to get out of a loveless world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's 2 things to look at first. First of all, look at the full spectrum of love. So don't just try and think that, like, we have a hierarchy of love, which is a little bit weird, which is very cultural. Within the West, we place romantic love at the top of it. Then we have parental love. And then maybe under that, we might have our families and our friends, and it all kind of diminishes as it goes down. There is no hierarchy of love. They all have amazing benefits for you in terms of your mental and physical health, in terms of your life satisfaction. So I think, first of all, look at the full opportunity of spectrum that you have. Because even though, we may, laugh at people who talk about their fur babies, actually studies have shown very powerfully how important those relationships are. So I think we need to be a little bit aware of not having that hierarchy. So look at the spectrum, search that spectrum. Secondly, Don't forget the love you find within your community. And one of the best ways to find love in your life is by helping somebody else. We know from studies that people who help other people are much more satisfied with life. They have much better mental and physical health, and they build really strong relationships with other people. So if you are struggling to find love in your life, if you feel you are able, go out and help somebody else. Find somebody to help. Find a community organization you can help. And there you will find love, I promise you.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Thank you. On the flip side, you sort of fascinatingly talk about the dangers and the potentially pathological elements of love, and you mentioned the parasocial relationships and attachment. Do you think we may sometimes have too rose-tinted a societal view of love? Should we be wary of it at all? I mean, you talk about awe a lot in the book. You know, you're in awe of love. That's not always positive, is it?
No, I think one of the things I really wanted to do in the book was bring in the negative side of love, because I think it's something that we don't acknowledge very often. And I think it's something that maybe previous books haven't focused on. So there is a title, the answer to the question, what is love, is control. And ultimately, love is about control. Love is evolution's answer to getting us all to get on with each other so that the genes carry on down the generation. So evolution is controlling us through love. It's a benign control, and it's one that's mostly hugely enjoyable, but it's control nonetheless. But the issue we have is because we have this absolute visceral need for love in our lives, and I think maybe we all experienced that during COVID, during lockdown, when you physically yearn to be with those you love, because we have that drive and because it's so linked into our psychology and our biology, it means that unfortunately that need can be used to manipulate us, to coerce us. And in fact, one of the things that we know separates animal love from human love is that we are the only species that uses love to manipulate, coerce, and control people, unfortunately. And so in that chapter, I talk about, obviously, one of the negative side of love that people always go for is jealousy. Fine, and we describe jealousy. But beyond that, I talk about the dark triad personality. So this is a person who has three particular personality attributes: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathology. Okay, and that's known as the dark triad. And studies have shown that people who have the dark triad personality are much more likely to use love as a form of control. They are much more likely to be the abuser in a relationship. I then go on to actually look at studies and talk to victims of personal domestic violence, intimate personal violence themselves, to try and understand where love sits in those relationships. Because if you talk to survivors of domestic violence, they still speak of love. And that can be quite a tricky thing, I think, to grasp sometimes, that how can they think there's love there, but they do. And I think in one sense that opens up that argument that we all get to define love as we wish. And then finally, we get to the end of the chapter and we broaden it out, and I look at charismatic leadership. And obviously all charismatic leaders are really good at building attachments to their followers and getting their followers to do the most amazing things. And in many ways, that's a positive thing. If you think of the charismatic leaders, I don't know, Barack Obama, Nelson Mandela, people like that, who've really got their followers to bond in an amazing way and bond to them in an amazing way. That's using the neurochemistry of love. And I talk about how they are amazing at getting the neurochemistry of love flowing at their meetings. However, the other side of that is some charismatic leaders are not nice. And they use those techniques the same to make people carry out the most unconscionable acts. And so there is a dark side to the group charismatic leader as well. And then very finally, at the very end, I look at love drugs and our desire to control love. What we find really difficult with love is its lack of controllability, its lack of predictability. And therefore, going ahead, love drugs are on the horizon, and drugs that can maybe control who we fall in love with, how we fall in love, whether people fall in love with us. So that's a little bit scary and ethical minefield, but that's something I look at as well.
You mentioned in that answer jealousy, and you talk about the physicality of jealousy in the book really interestingly. A quote that I love is by Dr Anna Machin, and she said, jealousy can lead you to the dark places where you need the most healing, and it can teach you to live in peace if you let it. Where does jealousy fit into love? Is it always a negative thing? Should we, what have you learned about jealousy?
Jealousy evolved, like all emotions, to protect us and to make us take a decision in a threatening situation. So what jealousy makes us do is it makes us put all our attention on that person and take a decision, either leg it, either or confront the person or put more effort into the relationship to maintain it. So your survival within that relationship is being threatened, and therefore your attention, your energy needs to be put on it. So that's why it's such a powerful emotion, and why you get such a physiological reaction to jealousy. So it evolved for a good thing. Unfortunately, like a lot of attributes that evolve, it's not 100% perfect. And so unfortunately, extreme jealousy is the price we pay for having low-level jealousy, which actually is an adaptation to make sure you invest in the relationship or leg it.
A final question for me, and then we'll move on to the audience. You talk about polyamory in the book. I think what's fascinating for me about polyamory is how it sort of unveils that different expressions of love in a society can really threaten each other. You know, an insecure monogamous couple might look at a poly couple and say, yeah, you think you're better than me. And the same works for if you have secrets with a best friend and you don't share that with a romantic partner, you may judge that. Why do we struggle to hold multiple different formulations of love in those around us? Like, you know, you be you, I'll be me. Is there something societal there? Is there something evolutionary there?
I don't think it's not evolutionary. I think it's mainly societal. I think, you know, for example, your example there of your lover being, you know, jealous because you've whispered your secrets to your best friend. That's partly of a worry that you become more intimate with your best friend and you put more energy into your best friend. We only have a finite amount of cognitive energy and time to invest in our relationships. That's where Dunbar's number comes from. And therefore, if you give your time and energy to this relationship will probably get less. And that can be a threat. And that's why we can feel jealous when maybe our friends go off with another friend or something like that. We can feel that slight, you know, I'm under threat here. When we look at things like polyamory and monogamy, these are things that really define you. They are ways that people self-identify. And I think if somebody else self-identifies in a different way, and that is a real challenge to you, particularly monogamy. Monogamy is a really deep-seated cultural construct. And it's there because it makes society nice and neat. And so it's written into religious rules, it's written into legal rules because it keeps society nice and under control. So the powers that be like that, because we know you're going to pair off. If you had something like polyamory where ultimately you can end up with as many partners as you want, that to the powers that be, to the religions, is chaos. You cannot keep control of everybody. So cultural monogamy is really a form of societal control. And therefore, and it's really deep-seated. And therefore, when something comes towards us which threatens that, the way we deal with that is actually by making lots of negative comments, which is why polyamorous are generally seen in a negative light, which is unfortunate. But that's what studies show. If you ask most people, what do you think the characteristics of a polyamorous person are? You get answers like immoral, highly sexualized, dissatisfied, you know, all these sorts of things. But it's because you're threatened.
Completely fascinating. Thank you so much. We've got so many brilliant audience questions, so I'm going to move on to this now.
Yeah.
Billy asks, is there any connection at all between the different hormones we produce and our different love languages? E.g., could you predict that if someone produces tons of oxytocin, they might particularly like physical touch as part of their love languages?
Yes, there probably is. It's not something I've studied directly, but certainly we know that people, for example, with higher levels of circulating oxytocin are much more open to touch. They're much more likely to touch other people. They're much more likely to do things like hold somebody's gaze when they're talking, that kind of thing. So yes, it does, particularly your level of oxytocin has a real effect upon your willingness to be intimate with somebody. We know most about oxytocin simply because oxytocin is the easiest one to access. So unfortunately, dopamine, beta endorphin, we have to do some quite horrible invasive things. So I don't know whether they do, but oxytocin certainly does. And it also affects your overall love behavior. So we all exist at different baseline levels of these chemicals. And we know that people who have higher levels of circulating oxytocin, for example, are more open to forming social relationships, are more open to being touched, to touch, hold gaze, be more trusting, these sorts of things.
Fascinating. So we've had lots of questions. We have Konstantinos and Jane have both asked, about self-love and where that fits into all of this. Do you look at that at all?
I don't. Self-love is not something that people, I need to, because this is like the third person who's asked me this question. I don't. I look at dyadic relationships. So I look at couples or beyond that. Mm-hmm. So I haven't looked at self-love. If you were going to ask me to hypothesize, do I think self-love is love as in defined dyadically or in terms of the group, I would probably say no. Mm-hmm. So I think if we put you in a scanner and we asked you to practice self-love, I think we would probably see some dopamine because you were doing something that was rewarding. I very much doubt we would see the others firing off. And I don't think we would necessarily see the full fingerprint of love. You'd see the dopaminergic circuits go, but I don't think you'd see the others. I think self-love is a very different thing. It's a form of self-care. And it's not a dyadic thing, and it's not there to help you bond with anybody else. So I imagine that we wouldn't see the same sort of fingerprint, but I could be completely wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this jumps onto something that Charlie said, which is English uniquely bad at the sort of dictionary definition, the one label of love? I mean, what you're mentioning there, self-love and romantic love and partnership love, they're all subtly different, but we only have one word for it. Did you ever scream at the one word problem?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it is tricky. And when you look at other cultures who, like some of the Arabic cultures, have the most wonderful terms for love and really, really like finite categories of love, even within parenting love or familial love. That's astonishing. And it's so beautiful because it allows that culture to really embrace the full spectrum. I think the reason why we are so bad at embracing the full spectrum is because we have just one word. And generally when I say to people the word love, they will jump to romantic love, possibly their children, but usually romantic love. And that's really restrictive because it denies all the other, and it denies the subtlety within romantic love. There are huge subtleties there. So yeah, it's hugely inadequate, but I don't think we're going to change it anytime soon.
So you've been sort of clear about the chemicals that are consistent across all of love. Delphine asks, sort of in the brain itself, is love for a friend and love for a partner exactly the same, or are there subtle differences there? No,
there are subtle differences there. And there are between all the different sorts of love. So there is an underlying fingerprint of love, and that will involve, as I said before, the dopaminergic circuits, a lot of activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is this bit at the front, because that's where your social cognition sits. And that tends to be the same for all types of love. But then you get these lovely additions. So if we look at sexual love, then the hypothalamus will kick off because that's where your sex hormones are. If we look at parental love, then an area called the PAG will kick off because that's linked to nurturing. When you look at friendship love, it is very like romantic love, apart from, unless you hold a secret desire for one of your friends, the hypothalamus doesn't kick off. The other thing to say about, for example, kinship love is that the activations tend to be more delayed in kinship love. So if I were to flash up a picture of your romantic love, your circuits would kick off much quicker than, for example, in kinship love. Not in kinship, in friendship love. So friendship love seems to be very slightly more conscious. But yeah, so there are subtle differences between all those. Yeah.
Amazing. The ick feeling. Michelle asks, when you've loved someone more than anything and been addicted to that person, once it goes bad, what is it that switches off to make it almost loathing? Talking from experience. Usually
what happens is generally we don't wake up one morning and completely hate the other person. So what you tend to do is you do this slow withdrawal. And it's a little bit like, going to rehab and slow removing from an opiate. So very, very slowly, you might, for example, spend more time away from the person. You might spend less time touching the person, talking to the person, laughing with the person. And so very slowly, your levels of neurochemicals, which have been existing at quite a high level, will start to drop. That will start, for a start, you feeling physically and mentally less positive, because particularly beta endorphin underpins your pain network as well. That's where it evolved. It's your body's painkiller. So you've been existing at a high level of painkiller. So all those aches and pains which have been masked will start to come out. Your mental health, because you're existing at a lower level of these lovely, happy, shiny, will start to feel a bit weird. Your cortisol will raise. And that's your stress hormone. And therefore you will, start to get this icky, yucky feeling. And definitely you will no longer feel pulled towards that person. There will also be a sort of psychological icky feeling, but due to the fact that, I don't know, everything they do annoys you, or is a red flag, or pushes your triggers, or whatever it might be. So there's like this combination of a sort of a biological and a psychological withdrawal, which basically leaves you feeling pretty about life.
It's never an easy answer, is it? You can just be, you can just say, I don't know, they don't do the dishes or something.
Yeah.
You mentioned rehab there. Claire asks, is there a link between people being prone to substance addiction and falling in love easily or obsessively?
Oddly, there isn't a link between that, no. What there is a link between, what we find, if you look at the relationships that opioid addicts have, because they are getting a satiation of opiate from somebody somewhere else, which is giving them that nice endorphin hit, what you will tend to find is their relationships are less strong, their relationships are less intense, they might not even be in any love relationships. And ultimately, the most powerful love relationship in their life is with their drug. And I think if you talk to families of people who are opioid addicts, that's what they would say. So what addiction to opiates seems to do is actually replace the need for human love in your life, because you are getting an external source, an artificial source from somewhere else, rather than getting that endorphin hit from being with somebody else.
Really interesting. So an anonymous attendee asks, did you find your socio-political views changing as you did your research? It dawns on me that the system of capitalism that we live in now is uniquely suited to erode wider love. How much of this is at a systemic level?
You know what? Yes, it has, in different ways. I think, yes, capitalism has pushed romantic love in particular up to the top of the tree, big time. You know, I was asked to look at a dating show to write an article the other day, and I had to go onto Netflix, where I spend much of the time, but I do not spend my time watching Netflix. There are so many dating shows on Netflix, and our whole media focus, our commerce, the dating industry, the wedding industry is a multi-billion pound industry. And because of this, it's kind of told us that this is the pinnacle of life. Being with somebody romantically is the pinnacle of life. Now, from an evolutionary point of view, yes, I suppose it is, because we would like you to put some genes down the generations. But actually, if we look at it from a societal point of view, particularly in the West, where most women now do not need to marry a man to survive. In the 100 years ago, you had to be married because you had to have that for the financial input, for your status in society. It was very important you found a partner. These days, you don't need that. We have, to a certain extent, control over our contraception. Therefore, you don't have to have child love. So actually, why is romantic love at the pinnacle? You do need to have relationships in your life. I will tell you that. If you have no relationships, you will suffer mentally and physically. But look at your friendships. Your friendships are so powerful. And in fact, there's a whole section. One of my titles in my book is Underestimated, because we underestimate our friendship love and how important it is to us psychologically, biologically, from a life satisfaction point of view. So yes, I think my eyes have been opened. I think the focus we have on romantic love is a little bit bizarre. And I think from a socio-political point of view, obviously being an anthropologist, I've always gone across cultures. That's my job, to study love across all cultures. So I've always, in a way, I suppose, had my eyes quite open to, the different societal rules that you have depending on where you are. But the more I look at it, and particularly talking to people like polyamorists, or this was the first time I'd actually personally sat down and talked to a load of nuns.
You don't do that every Monday?
I don't do that every day. It was a really good day. I really enjoyed it. They were the most amazing people. And that opened my eyes. So personally, my eyes were opened, even as an anthropologist who studied it for a very long time, and tried to be as universal and open-minded as I possibly could be. But yeah, I think capitalism does have a way to go. What I will say is the Western view of romantic love, the capitalist view of romantic love, is extending across the globe. So if you look at the way ideas about romantic love have changed in China, even over the last 2 decades, they're astonishing. They now see love in the Western romantic context, whereas 20 years ago, they wouldn't have.
It was really interesting, actually, with the border closures and COVID and looking at which groups got exemptions. And I remember looking at so my partner's in the Netherlands, and I was looking at the sort of the Dutch thing you have to sign off to promise that you're in a long-term relationship, and it says promise that you've been in an exclusive relationship. So immediately you've got that
Yeah.
culturally.
Yeah, that
And I
idea that it
wonder,
has to be exclusive. Whereas,
right.
the polyamorists who I quote in the book, so the book is full of interviews as well as science, because as an anthropologist, I think the human voice is very important. And talking to all the polyamorists, they would have said the exact opposite. Human love is not exclusive, and actually your heart expands the more people you fall in love with. So they would say they love each of their partners as intensely, and they would therefore wish to see, every partner across the borders rather than just one. So yeah, it's really interesting, those assumptions we make.
Two final questions, and then I promise I'll let you go and have your tea. An anonymous attendee asks, what is the cause of love being blind?
Aha! There is a cause. I love this question. Thank you for answering.
I thought you would.
Love is blind, because what happens when you first fall in love, obviously the brain's firing off in lots of terribly exciting ways. We see lots of lovely activations, but we also see deactivations. And what happens when you're in love is the areas of the brain which are linked to mentalizing shut down. Now, mentalizing is the ability to guess somebody's intentions. So theory of mind is the lowest level of mentalizing. And that bit shuts down. So you are unable to tell whether this new love, for example, is not good for you. Whilst all your friends can see they're a cheat or they're a liar or they're unpleasant or all these sorts of things, you literally cannot see it. So love is actually blind, because your brain, in a really helpful fashion, shuts that bit down for a little period. Now, ultimately, that stops happening and it does reactivate. And so over a period of time, you might come to the realization that maybe this person isn't for you. But yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And a colleague and I were having a discussion the other day about why that evolved. And we think it's because if it hadn't evolved, humans are so paranoid that they would just sit on the fence and not do anything unless you turn that bit off. So that might be the reason. I don't know.
And one final question for me. How many times have you been asked at a conference or in a Zoom or whatever, what is love, baby, don't hurt me? Because it's so tempting. It was the first one on my list of questions.
Was it? Yes. No, I always get that I have to play that piece of music. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in fact, I think I've come onto that piece of music a few times. But.
Well, I mean, and I'm so shocked that you didn't end your book with, love is all around or something like that. It must be so tempting.
I managed to resist
to lean into
yes.
the cliches, no?
Yes, absolutely. No, I managed to resist that. It's a cliche-free zone, I think.
It is cliche-free zone. It's also a brilliant book. So audience, please go and check out Why We Love, the new science behind our closest relationships. And I could talk to you for hours, but sad we have to wrap up there. Please do head over to the How To Academy website to see some more exciting speakers that we're hosting over the next few months. Speaking of exciting speakers, Anna, thank you so much. Fascinating talk. Thank you, audience, for all of your brilliant questions. We hope to see you all very soon. Anna, I'll give the final word to you.
Thank you. And I'm glad you've all enjoyed the evening. And thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.